Hello everyone, it's Emma and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be continuing in my Where Does Our Waste Go series, and we're going to be talking about our e-waste. Where does our tech go? So if you're new here, this is the first video you happen to catch in this series. I highly encourage you to check out the other 4 I have in this series so far. So far we have talked about plastic, glass, metal, and paper. I will leave the entire series linked up here as well as down below. There's no really order in which you need to watch these, though I do mention some points in other videos that I might mention in here and I might not explain them as much, so definitely check them out after this. The point of this series and the inspiration is because I am new to living in an area where we can actually visually see the impact we have on the planet with our physical waste. If you didn't know, I live on a small island in the Pacific called Okinawa. It is part of Japan. We are one stop for garbage on the way to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and I noticed so much plastic specifically on our shores. That inspired me to create this series and explore why does so much of our waste end up in the ocean? Why does so much of our waste end up overseas and other countries? So as the main goal is to explore the recyclability of each of these materials, why each of them is only recycled so much or so little, value in recycling all these materials, and so forth. So that is really all I have for an intro. If you are new here and you don't know that I talk really fast, there are a few things that you can do to help you if that is something that bothers you. First off, you can find the script linked down below. You can just read along if you prefer that method, or you can actually use the gear icon right down here in this corner to slow the speed of this video. So obviously there's a big value in recycling each of the materials we've already talked about in this series, but when it comes to technology, it is a little bit more important. I don't want to say it's more important, but really that there is so much value in recycling technology because technology is made of so many different types of metals. The fact is that technology is the most expensive item that we waste. Tech is made up of many precious materials, often including copper, gold, silver, and more. It costs a lot to mine these new materials, which instead we could be recycling with our old tech. But just how much tech do we discard of each year? In 2016, the world as a whole discarded 49 million tons of e-waste, and by 2021, just in a few months, they estimate that number to be over 57 million tons. And obviously this number will continue to increase the more that technology becomes more valuable in our lives. With each new iPhone that's released, with each new computer, with each new gadget that gets released, more of that tech just ends up in the landfill, or sometimes shipped overseas. We'll get into that later. The US Environmental Protection Agency described recycling technology as very valuable. 1 metric ton of circuit boards can contain 40 to 800 times the amount of gold and 30 to 40 times the amount of copper that can be mined from 1 metric ton of ore in the US. If you only choose to recycle one material, which you should recycle all materials, but if you only choose one, choose tech. Tech is so valuable and it should not end up buried in the dirt somewhere or in the ocean. Even worse. So not only is it valuable when it comes to material, but when it comes to money as well. The estimated monetary value of recoverable materials in electronics in 2016 was $64.6 billion US, and only 20% of electronics was recycled that year. And of course, not only this, but as we probably already know, technology can be very hazardous to the soil and to our water. You probably know this when you think of batteries. Batteries contain battery acid. They also contain other harmful things that when those materials get buried in the dirt or they end up in the ocean, they break down and then those chemicals get leached into our groundwater and into our dirt. Electronics contain heavy metals like lead, mercury, and so forth. It is also becoming harder for manufacturers to come across raw materials to use. Plus, it is more expensive to mine raw materials than it is to recycle old ones. And this is not always the case, as we saw in previous videos with other materials like plastic, glass, and paper. It is actually cheaper to just harvest new materials than it is to recycle plastic, glass, and paper. But on the other hand, tech and other metals that we recycle, it is more valuable to recycle it than it is to mine raw materials. So overall, there are several reasons why technology should be recycled and the value of recycling technology. Currently, e-waste accounts for 2% of waste in US landfills, but tech accounts for 70% of the toxic waste in the US alone. First, let's address the 2 types of recycling. We have formal and informal. If you're not familiar with recycling and how it works in the US and in other countries, then it might be a little bit challenging for you to distinguish the difference right off the bat. Informal is recycling in correct facilities with safety measures, with personal protective equipment, and informal is quite the opposite. It is done in areas where there are no regulations, there's no equipment, and it's typically a lot more hazardous for the informal type of recycling. When it comes to formal recycling, it is usually the disassembling of electronics, separating the parts, cleaning, and then recycling. Of course, handling e-waste can be dangerous, which increases the amount in which it costs to recycle, especially domestically. Technology, unfortunately, is another one of those things where the US exports their waste. We saw this with plastic as well. And another unfortunate thing in the US is there is no federal laws regulating the recycling of technology meaning there is no mandate to recycle technology, as well as there is no laws regulating the export of our e-waste. This means that it is largely up to the states and sometimes even up to the corporations themselves. Informal recycling, on the other hand, is done in unlicensed and unregulated areas, specifically in Asia, where wealthy nations send their tech. It is here that men, women, and even children recover precious materials from e-waste. They do so by burning devices to melt away the plastic and use mercury and acids to recover gold almost entirely by hand. They might not be given PPE and might not even know what they are doing is dangerous or toxic. So not only does e-waste have an effect on the people themselves, on their personal health, but it also affects these areas when it comes to their water, soil, and air. Now that we know the difference between the two and kind of how much effort and work goes into recycling tech, let's talk about where our tech is actually recycled, specifically when it comes to US e-waste. The US is the second largest producer of e-waste behind China. The US in 2012 produced 10 million tons of e-waste alone, which equals to roughly 64 pounds per person. 64 pounds of e-waste per person, that is so much. I mean, granted, tech is heavy, but like 64 pounds per person. That's insane. And obviously when I'm talking about tech, I'm not just talking about cell phones, cameras, computers, but this is also like ovens, refrigerators, microwaves, batteries, all that stuff across the board. Of this 10 million tons of e-waste in the US, only 29% was recycled. The rest usually goes to landfill. Precious metals and harmful chemicals end up in the ground only to sit there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Though, of this 29% supposedly recycled in the US, 40% of that was found to be exported instead. When we export it, it is sent to, quote, developing countries. I don't like that term, and I might talk about that in a future video, but these countries are typically in Asia. Like we already talked about with informal recycling, this is areas where recycling is not usually regulated, there are not usually recycling laws, and it is extremely hazardous. Not to mention it's unethical and unfair because they probably aren't getting paid very fairly. It includes child labor sometimes. There's a whole lot that goes into this. I'm actually going to leave a link down below for a GPS tracker Jim Puckett and his team developed. They hooked up these GPS devices to different electronics from recycling facilities across the US, and then they tracked where those GPSs ended up. A few of them ended up domestically in the US, but most of it was shipped to Asia. I'm not going to get into it too much farther here. The study linked down below is very interesting, very in-depth. I highly encourage you to check it out. I'll also leave all my other sources linked down below, of course. The terrible part about this too, other than it being hazardous and unethical, is that shipping waste overseas is often illegal. So there is a caveat. We can ship waste, we being the US and other wealthy nations, ship waste overseas if it can be refurbished and reused. For example, if my iPhone cracked and I didn't want to get the screen repaired myself, I could give it to a recycling facility. The recycling facility technically could send it overseas because it just needs a new screen. It can be reused and refurbished. But let's just say, for example, my iPhone just completely died and I were to send it to a recycling facility. Technically, they should not send it overseas. That is illegal because it cannot be refurbished or reused. And that just happens to be the case though. Oftentimes wealthy nations just send all of their waste overseas because it's easier, I guess. And of course, as with everything when it comes to legal matters, there are always loopholes, there are always ways for companies to get around this sort of stuff. Something that needs to be done, of course, is better enforcement of these laws and better written laws for recycling. So something that you can do about that as a citizen of the earth, as a citizen of the US, is to vote. There are other problems than just the US sending their waste overseas. There are a lot of issues when it comes to producers, manufacturers, and consumers even as well. So let's dive into those. The first one I'd like to talk about is planned obsolescence. If you have never heard this term before, basically what it means is companies taking their products and slowly degrading them over time. Biggest example is Apple. It's really unfortunate because Apple makes great products, but they have even openly admitted to using planned obsolescence in their marketing scheme, I suppose. So basically what this means is one day my iPhone 8 will be out of date and they will no longer allow me to software update my phone. This happened with my old iPhone 6, and a big reason why I had to get rid of it, its battery life was so low I had to charge it several times throughout the day. Apple was no longer sending me updates to that iPhone 6, and once you can't update the software on your phone, not only does it, become out of date, but it also quits working. So basically what this means is that customers cannot fix the problems. We as consumers can't continue to use what we already have because the companies aren't helping us to keep those products alive. So with technology becoming more and more popular, it's becoming cheaper as well. It is becoming just so much easier to, oh no, my phone quit working, toss it out, get a new one. When instead you can probably find a way to fix your phone. If your screen is cracked, get it fixed. If your battery life is depleting, get a new battery. Sure, that's still a little bit of e-waste, but it's better than throwing out the whole phone. Not only this, but it is becoming easier for companies to make their products more cheaply. So then instead of them making a product that's built to last. They're going to build a product that's going to last you a few years, but then it's going to turn into junk, and then it's going to be cheap for you to just buy a new one anyway. So moving right along, the next thing that we can do as consumers is to just repair what we already have. It goes kind of alongside planned obsolescence, though obviously sometimes planned obsolescence gets in the way and we can't repair it, but when you can repair your items, definitely do so. If your fridge quit working, please don't just throw it out and buy a new one. See if you can find the issue first. It might just be a matter of cleaning the bottom of your fridge. Maybe there's too many dust bunnies in there. You can obviously try to fix it yourself. My mom once fixed our dryer by herself just by YouTubing it, but you can also hire a repairman too. Even see if one of your friends can come help you, someone who is a little more technologically advanced than you are, but definitely try to repair it first. I really, really hope your first thought is not just throw it out the fridge, let's buy a new one, especially with big appliances because they are expensive. If anything, do it for your wallet. I always come back to that. Of course, a remaining issue is the complicated recycling process, like we already talked about, not only with tech, but with other materials as well. It is just not profitable enough most of the time to recycle products, as well as it can become very hazardous, very dangerous, very complicated, very expensive. Not only this, but the US and other countries don't make it easy to recycle as well. There is no incentive to recycle. There's very little education on recycling as well. And obviously it's harder or easier depending on where you live. If you live in a big city, it's going to be a lot easier for you to find a recycling facility. Your recycling facility will probably take more materials as well. But if you live out in the middle of nowhere, you might get lucky if they accept plastic and metal. Some recycling facilities won't take glass, some won't take certain kinds of plastics, and it really is very complicated to recycle. For tech, you might even have to find special facilities, you might even have to transport it yourself. And of course, this isn't always easy because not everyone has access to their own vehicle. So something that our governments need to do, our cities need to do, is to make recycling easier, have more drop-off locations, have more recycling facilities, maybe not necessarily recycling facilities. But I guess what I'm saying is if, in Montana or Wyoming, those are pretty not very largely populated areas, if there's only one major recycling facility in all of Wyoming, the smaller cities should at least have drop-off locations to take to the big city to have recycled. I think it would also be great if we had more access to curbside recycling. Not only should everyone have access to it, but instead of just being like, sorry, you can only put plastic and cans in here, but also being able to put tech in our curbside recycling and other weird things. There's actually a whole lot of things that you cannot put in your curbside recycling. I'll leave a video up here in the cards. And of course, we need to talk about lack of responsibility on both ends, on the producer and on the consumer. Obviously, there is so much lack of responsibility when it comes to the producers and the manufacturers. A lot of the responsibility of recycling is on the consumer. Like, hey, you bought this iPhone, it's now your responsibility to dispose of it properly, and that's your own personal carbon footprint. Like, no, that it should be Apple's responsibility. I was just casually scratching my elbow. If companies were required to recycle properly, if they were required to recycle their own products to make new products, if they offered take-back programs, even that would be great too. Basically what it comes down to is companies should be responsible for the waste that they create and not the consumer. But of course there's also consumer responsibility. Like I talked about earlier, we should have the responsibility to make our products last. We shouldn't just instantly throw something away because it had a little glitch, because it quit working just a little bit. We shouldn't just toss our phones around willy-nilly. We should put cases on them and protect them, make them last. Speaking of which, if you're looking for an eco-friendly phone case, you can check out Pila Case right here. I did a full review on them forever ago. It's a bit of an old video, but you can check it out up here. Get to know more about Pila Case and why they're a more eco-friendly option as opposed to a plastic case. The last thing that we can do as consumers though is to donate instead of throw out. If your iPhone, your camera, whatever is actually like dead, it doesn't even turn on, don't donate it. Send that to a recycling facility or even like a refurbishing facility maybe. But say for example, I just want to upgrade my iPhone. Say the new iPhone 11 or whatever comes out. I don't even know what they're on. And I'm like, my iPhone 8 works perfectly great, but I want the new iPhone anyway. Don't do that. Don't be that guy. At least try to donate your old iPhone. Be like, okay, my iPhone 8 works perfectly great. I'm gonna donate it. Or you can even sell it if you want to make some money back. But if your device is working perfectly fine, or at least decently fine, please donate or sell it. I've mentioned this in probably every single one of these videos and every single recycling video I talk about. We need to think about our waste more. Instead of thinking like buy, use, garbage, we need to think of buy, use, donate, repair, reuse. What else? Even recycle. We need to think about all of these things before we just think about sending it to the landfill. Something that you might even be able to do with technology is donate your old technology, even if it doesn't work, to schools and to technical institutes, to technical research facilities, to robotics programs, all that sort of stuff. They might use any little bits and pieces of your tech because that is definitely more likely to get used than sending it to a recycling facility and sending it overseas where it's going to be handled unethically. As always, the landfill should be the last resort. Recycling should be the last resort. Above that, try to find something else before those two options. I like to try to end all of these videos on a positive note, but honestly, it's a bit hard when it comes to tech. Obviously, the biggest thing that we can do as consumers is to buy less. Only buy what you need. When you need something, try to shop secondhand. When you're done with an item, donate or sell it instead. And of course, spread the word, educate others. Those are the two biggest things I think we can do as consumers. Obviously, educate ourselves, but then also consume and dispose of things properly and responsibly, and then educate others on this as well. You can share this video if you think it will be helpful, or you can even just bring this up in conversation with your friends and family, but let others know the truth about tech creation and tech recycling, because chances are if people know the truth about this stuff, they might try to find other options. If possible, try to support the recycling industry by purchasing recycled tech if you have to buy new. I'll try to find some companies and link them down below for some recycled tech companies, because it is always important to show these companies that there's a demand for what they are creating and show less of a demand to companies that are using less responsible practices. Kind of like with all the videos in this series, it might seem pretty grim right now, it might seem pretty sad and unfixable, but there's always hope. We all need to break from our consumeristic mindset and work towards becoming more of a circular economy. We need to buy less, consume less, throw away less, and instead find other options instead of the landfill. Like I already mentioned, instead of thinking buy brand new, use for a little bit, throw away into the landfill, think of buy used, use it as much as I possibly can, recycle, donate, refurbish, repurpose, whatever it may be, and then landfill. Landfill should always be the last resort. This is especially the case when it comes to technology. It should never end up in the trash. It is way too valuable and also way too hazardous to end up in our ground, to end up in our water. Especially as we get closer to Thanksgiving and Black Friday and Christmas. Be mindful of what you consume. If you didn't know, we as the US consume 25% more from October to December than we do the rest of the year. 25% more. So when you're out Black Friday shopping, if you do that, think about, do I really need this new 64-inch TV? Do I really need this new iPhone? Ask yourself those questions. Buy what you actually need. And of course, not only think about what you're purchasing, but how you're disposing of what you already have. Ask yourself, can my iPhone be recycled? Can I sell my iPhone? Can I donate it? And if you're interested in learning more about the issues of Black Friday, definitely subscribe and stay tuned. I have a video planned for November for talking about that. As always, I hope that you were able to learn something from this video. I hope that you found it helpful and maybe even found it inspirational. If you did, I would really appreciate if you gave this video a thumbs up. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe. I talk about all things across the zero waste spectrum. I focus specifically on practical sustainability, which is easy, free, fun ways to make zero waste fun for everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to learn more about recycling, because recycling is so fun and we can always do it better. As always, remember that these small changes you make have a big impact in the long run. Bye guys. That when they become buried in the dirt, those acids, those chemicals, the sun is terrible today. And this is not usually, that got bright again. This is so fun. But for example, say this iPhone just completely, what's the term? Died? Let me know, I don't know. Let me know anything down below. Until next time, remember that these